Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Jane Gov. I am a youth librarian at Pasadena Public Library. Today, in celebration of Black History Month, we are learning about Calas rice fritters. So in today's lesson, we'll go through a little bit of the history, and I'll take you step by step on how to make these from scratch. First off, we do need to make some rice because they're rice fritters. So we are going to start off with just cooking the rice. We are going to take 3/4 cup dry rice. We're going to wash the rice and then drain it. I usually wash it about a couple of times. And then we're going to add drinking water. For this amount, it would be about a cup and 2 tablespoons of drinking water. You put that back in the pot. We're going to cover it, and then we're going to cook it on low heat on stovetop. I know some of you may have a rice cooker, and that's fine. If you want to use that, that's fine as well. I almost always use a rice cooker, but because not everyone has one, we are going to do it over stovetop in this lesson. So I have 3/4 rice in here. I'm going to do this over the sink. I think some of you can probably see me in your tiny screen there. Again, I'm going to fill it up with the just regular sink water, swish it around a bit, pour out the water. I'm going to hold, on the side of the pot so that the rice doesn't leak out. And then I'm going to do it again and then drain it again. So I'm just doing this. I already did it once. I'm just swishing the rice around so that it gets washed and then drain it. And I'm going to add 1 cup. And then 2 tablespoons, which is about 1/8 of a cup. So then I'm going to turn on my stove. And wait for this to simmer. You don't need to stir it or anything. Just make sure that all the rice is in the water. Okay, so I don't know if you can see the water in my pot, but it is simmering a bit. So what I'm going to do now is turn it to low and then put your lid on it and wait 15 minutes. So I'm going to put my timer. While we wait for the rice to be cooked, I'm going to share the history of Calas. First off, what are Calas? Calas are Creole rice fritters. They are similar to beignets, both in taste and in look. They're usually made of leftover rice mixed with sugary egg batter, then fried and dusted with powdered sugar. The word Calas is from the Nupe word kara, meaning fried cake. Nupe are people from the west central Nigeria. And here's a bit about the history of Calas. Calas got such a fascinating history. So scholars think slaves from rice-growing parts of Africa probably brought Calas to New Orleans. In the 1760s, when the Spanish took control of Louisiana from the French, they brought with them a legal instrument called a quotation, which gave slaves the right to buy their freedom. For some enslaved Black women in the city, selling Calas was key to earning money for these purchases. They would purchase freedom for themselves and their families. They usually sold Calas on their day off. It was required at that time by law that slaves had a day off. So most had Sundays off. And after church, that's the day most often people would see Calas vendors out in the street yelling, "Hot Calas for sale." That illustration on the screen there is of a Calas vendor from an 1886 magazine. More than 1,400 New Orleans slaves bought their freedom under Spanish rule, but it is not clear just how many did so with Calas money. It's important to note that according to some African-American culinary historians, not all Calas vendors were enslaved, and the ones who were slaves often sold them for their mistresses. If they were lucky, they were allowed to keep a portion of that money or perhaps have it go toward their freedom. Free people of color were also very successful during this time, so some of those Calas vendors could have been wealthy merchants. In the 1800s, many African-American women made their living selling Calas and other street foods, even after Americans stopped the quotation soon after the 1803 Louisiana Purchase. In the 1900s, many Calas vendors disappeared. In 1940, only one merchant remained, but Calas still remains a popular treat at home among African Americans. There's this restaurant called the Old Coffee Pot, which is a French Quarter breakfast joint, and they have had Cala on the menus for decades. In the 1990s through today, Cala enthusiasts have been sharing the story of Cala. It's thanks to them that Cala have risen in popularity. In the early 2000s, variations of Cala, such as savory Cala, arise on the menu in America. In Africa today, women in the open air markets would still be making Cala. So traditionally, or in the early recipes for Cala, yeast was added to the batter to make a sponge, then proofed overnight, giving it a rise. We are not going to be using yeast in this recipe. Instead, we are going to be using baking powder as a rising agent. So on the screen there, you can see the recipe for what we are making today. The batter will require 2 cups cooked rice, cooled. It will also need 3 large eggs, 1 teaspoon vanilla, 1/3 cup of granulated sugar, 1 teaspoon of cinnamon, a 1/2 teaspoon of salt, 1/2 teaspoon of nutmeg, and 2 teaspoons of baking powder. And then we would need approximately 1 cup of flour. It might be less. Also traditionally, Cala were fried in lard. We are going to be using vegetable oil in this recipe, but you can also use canola oil or peanut oil. And to finish, we are going to finish with powdered sugar. To prep our station, we're going to make the batter. We do need to wait until the rice has been cooled first, so more on that later. We are going to set up our station around our stove. So we'll need to prep the oil in the pots. We'll need paper towels on a plate, so we have some place to put the cooked Cala and have it drain from the extra oil. And then we're going to, nearby your station, you're going to place your powdered sugar. Here's my pot. I'm going to pour all the oil in, again, approximately 2 cups. I'm going to drop my kernel in. And then, since I do have a thermometer, I'm also going to set my thermometer. Some of you might have different ones. I have a Candy thermometer. But what I really like about my thermometer is that it'll tell me when it reaches the temperature, so I don't have to look at it too much. I am going up to 345 on my alert. All right, I'm putting my pot on the stove, getting everything else I need nearby. So here's my plate. And then I'm gonna put a couple of napkins on it. A ladle for fishing out the cooked Calas. Thermometer. And getting the powdered sugar ready. All right, let's check on the rice. So there's my rice. My rice says 15 minutes. Actually, okay, if your rice looks like this, see how there's water? This is not done. So I guess it's deceiving. I'm going to set this for another 5 minutes until it looks fluffy. So let me take my lid off so you can see it. See how there's water on the edge there? So I turned up my heat just a little. I don't know if you can see that. And I'm gonna leave it here for another 5 minutes and I'm gonna check in again. So you can see that my rice is bubbly and getting fluffy. It is not quite done. My timer went off again. I think my flame is just too low. So I'm going to do another 3 minutes. But I don't know if you can see it in the, you see how there's bubbles around it. So I can tell that this is not done, but we are going to wait another 3 minutes. Okay, my timer is done. So mine took a really long time. I think that was 23 minutes, but the rice is done. There's no more bubbly in this. So here's the rice. I just took it off the flame. So what I'm going to do is carefully, don't get burned, take it out of the pot, put put it into a separate bowl. This is going to help cool it. But there you go. All right, so here's the rice. And what I'm gonna do is I'm using this large bowl and just sort of flattening it against the edges so that it could cool faster instead of it being in like one large clump. So we are gonna cool it like this. And we really do need the rice cooled because we are working with eggs. The eggs are in the batter and the eggs will just cook in your batter if your rice is hot. So we need to cool it before we start. I'm gonna throw it in the freezer, leave it in there for 5 minutes, and then I'm gonna check in on it again. So let me put a timer, 5 minutes. I'm gonna throw this in the freezer and I'll check in on it. Now it's time to make the batter. So let's look at those ingredients again. A third cup of granulated sugar. And then we need 1 teaspoon cinnamon, half teaspoon, oops, there's my timer. Half teaspoon salt, half teaspoon nutmeg, and 2 teaspoons baking powder. That's the little bag here. Go ahead and put all that in. And that's it. This part is done. And then get another bowl and crack your 3 eggs into the bowl. So in the smaller bowl, crack your 3 eggs and then add 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract. And that's in this little container. Here. All right, so here's my rice. I had it in there a little bit longer than 5 minutes because my timer went off a while ago, but I'm going to fluff it a bit and just use my hands to break through it because it is still not cooled. If you have your rice in the freezer, go ahead and take it out if it's already been in there 5 minutes or more. We need the rice to cool, so I am mixing my rice around and then putting it back in the freezer for another 5 minutes. So while you're waiting for your rice to cool, this would be a good time to turn on the heat for your oil. You can turn on medium heat or medium high. Just make sure that the heat is, or the fire is below your pot, and wait for the oil to heat up to the right temperature. You are looking for approximately between 350 to 375 degrees Fahrenheit. And you can either use a thermometer, the popcorn test, or the wooden spoon test, which I'll go over in just a moment. All right, so the wooden spoon test. So this is one of the ways that you can tell when oil is hot enough. If you have a wooden spoon, you can insert it into the oil and see how many bubbles form around the wood. So if nothing happens, that means the oil isn't ready. If the oil is bubbling, like fizzing, that means the oil is ready. Or if the oil is bubbling too much, like the bubbles around your spoon or around the wood will be bubbling a lot, and that means that it's too hot, so you have to turn down your heat. I do have a pre-recorded video of how that looks like when the oil is ready, so you can just take a look at the video and see if this test will work for you. We are not going to do it in this particular lesson because the change can happen really fast from being not ready to overheating. So I'm just going to show you a video so you can try it on your own later. The method we are going to be using in this lesson is the popcorn test. So that's why we dropped a kernel of popcorn in the middle of your oil when we were prepping the station. So once that pops, your oil is ready. You can remove that kernel and then you can start frying your calla. To note though, when the popcorn pops, make sure you turn down the heat to medium-low so that it doesn't overheat. Okay, so we are going to get back to making our batter. Just keep an eye out on your oil if you do have the heat on. If you're uncomfortable doing heating up the oil while you're making the batter, go ahead and just turn off the heat until your batter is done. The batter is really quick though, so I didn't want to, because we are on the tight timeline in this lesson, I wanted to heat the oil as we were making the batter so everything will be ready to go. But again, turn down your heat if you're not too sure about how quick you are going to be making your batter. Okay, so I'm going to get my rice. It has been in the freezer for another 5 minutes, so I think it's cooled now. Okay, so the rice is cooled. Just fluffing it again. All right, so now I'm ready to make the batter. I am keeping my eye out on my oil though, since my pot is on. So you will need a whisk and a spatula. So add this into your dry ingredients. Mix it around really fast. You don't need it to incorporate it too much. Just lightly beat it. Then I'm going to add my rice. And then mix it in. So the instructions are lightly beat the egg, add it to the dry ingredients. Then you're going to add your cooled rice. We're going to mix it just a bit. Next, you're going to need approximately 1 cup of flour and quickly incorporate it. You don't want to overbeat it because there's already eggs and baking powder in this. So it might, when you fry it, might taste tough if you overbeat it. Right now, it's fine at this point. What I'm going to do is to add half of this first, and then I'm going to mix it around. And then what I'm looking for is a thicker consistency, because depending on how much liquid is in your eggs, you might actually not need all of that flour. All right, so this is actually not bad. I only did half of it. If you end up using all of it, that's okay. But I only put half of it in there. I'm going to do just a tad more. All right, and this is the kind of consistency I'm looking for. I don't know if you can see how thick this is. If I sort of run my my spatula across it, it sort of makes like a bit of a line, and that's a good consistency. All right, my oil is done. So let me move this camera. over here. Now you can see, but the popcorn, it has popped. So I am turning my flame down to between low and medium. And then I'm gonna fish out this popcorn. We are going to fry in small batches, and you will also need 2 small spoons. Just scooping a bit of it and then popping it in there. Just flipping it over. It's gonna cook for about 4 to 6 minutes until it gets golden brown. And then you can pull it out of the oil and drain it on your plate with paper towels. right, so I don't know if you can see it over here, but I just pulled it out and I sprinkled it with powdered sugar. And this is done. So at this point, you can just eat it. You can serve it this way, or you can make more if you'd like. I am not going to be using all the batter today because I can't eat 25 of these. So I'm going to show you how to save your oil and also save your batter later. What I've done with this batter is I would make it maybe 4 or 5 days in a row in the morning so that I could use it up a little bit at a time. So you can do that too if you're not intending to, eat all of them right now or serve all of them to your family. So that is pretty much all the steps to making challah. And I hope everyone enjoys it. So what Okay, so some questions. Is this a dessert? I suppose you can eat it as a dessert, but it is most often a breakfast food, like a donut. Donuts are pretty sweet though. These are less sweet than donuts. And it's usually enjoyed in the morning with like a cup of coffee. But you can have it for dessert if you want. And this is the color. I don't know if you can still see it. It is a bit golden brown. Mine took about 4 minutes. I think 6 minutes probably would have made it really dark. This color is fine. A little bit lighter is fine. A little bit darker is fine. So, and it looks like some of you are done. I hope you enjoyed it. Yeah, they are really good. All right, let me show you what to do with the oil afterwards. So if you are not going to be making these, every day for the next few days, you might want to just save your oil and leave your batter in the fridge or freezer, depending on how long you want to leave it for. If you are not making these for another week, at least for another week, I would freeze your batter. And you can do that by just putting it in a container, taking saran wrap, plastic wrap, and kind of pressing it on top of the batter so that it touches it, and then putting your lid on and then put it in the freezer. Before you make it, you do have to defrost it, and the cook time might be a little different because you'll want to mix it again. And then when you fry it, just be very careful because anytime there's any bit of water in your batter, it might sort of like splash back a little bit. So step away before you're doing that. I unfortunately don't have a sample for you to see how that's done because I haven't tried freezing it before. I would normally just take this batter and just make it over a few days. So what I do is take my batter, and then I am going to get a container with the lid. Going to pour in the rest of my batter. Also, if you think you've made enough and you're not going to be using your you're not going to be making any more, turn off your oil, like turn off the flame and let the oil cool. Right? I'm just gonna cover it and then use it tomorrow morning. Again, if you're going to freeze it, put a piece of saran wrap just directly on top of it, cover it and throw it in the freezer. And it's probably good for, if in the freezer, it's probably good for a few months. In the fridge, it's probably good for a week. I've done it up to 5 days and it tastes fine. So for your oil, however, if you are going to make it, let's say tomorrow, wait until your oil cools. Pretty much about, it's temperature wise, that will be like about 90 or 80 degrees, cool enough for you to touch it and also cool enough for it not to heat up your pot with the lid on it so that there's condensation on it. You don't want condensation on it. So you want your oil to be cool enough to put a lid on it. So what I do is I just put the lid on top of my pot and I leave my pot there until tomorrow morning because the oil is pretty clean still and I could just use it that way. If you want to save your oil, like you're not making it tomorrow, I would strain it and then store it. You need to wait for it to cool. It will take a couple of hours for it to cool down to room temperature. And then what you can do is then strain it and then put it into a container. If you saved one of your containers, let's say something like this, you can just pour it into something like this. But again, this is plastic. You need to have your oil cool enough so that it's not going to melt your plastic or melt whatever container you're putting it in. So I'm going to share with you a video that I recorded a couple hours after my last test lesson. And what I've done is this is just a regular plastic container. And what I have here is a strainer. And what you're going to do is use that cheesecloth that you've been given, put it over your strainer. A couple of folds is fine. And then you are going to pour your cooled oil or room temperature oil into the cheesecloth. And you're just going to strain through it. So this will help keep all of those little bits of fried batter out of your next batch of frying, whatever you use this oil for. And this amount of oil should be enough for you to kind of cook that entire batch, this entire batch of calla before it gets too dark for you to use again. And then what I'm doing is I'm just checking the temperature of the oil, making sure it's cool enough, because again, you don't want condensation in your container because that will, bacteria will grow that way.